I want to talk to you guys about record labels. Why you need one, you don't. Why you don't need one, you might. How smaller indie labels work, how some bigger labels work, and how that can be of benefit to you as a smaller artist operating in an increasingly dense, complicated ecosystem of music. Not my favorite way of describing that, but you get what I mean. A lot of young bands really focus on finding a record label as soon as possible. They think that finding a label is going to catapult them to stardom, and everything after that is going to be cashing checks. A record label, with the exception of like a major label, like if Metal Blade or is Geffen still a thing, or Roadrunner, or somebody comes knocking on your door, that might change your life, in which case you can delete this video. But for the most of us, that's probably not going to happen. So we are going to be interacting with mid to smaller level indie labels. And those are fine. Those labels do all of the same things, just on a smaller scale. And scalability is really the big factor here as to whether or not you're going to be successful on a label, or whether or not you're even ready for a label. And so we're going to kind of break down a lot of those things. And throughout the last 5 or 6 years that I've really been pushing hard and, working as a musician, I've been signed or worked with 5 different labels across Wield and Woe and By Fire and Sword. So I have some experience in this. One of my best friends runs a label. I help with a label through some administrative things, submissions, stuff like that. So let's get into it. I think the first thing that a lot of smaller artists are thinking about when they're looking for a record label, or why they want a record label to begin with, is they want access to physical releases. They want someone to take their music, put it on tape, CD, vinyl, and release it to the masses. On a broad scale, that is the general function of a record label. There's far more to it than that. Record labels do a lot of things that the regular public doesn't know anything about, and a lot of things that even like the artist doesn't know anything about. But the A to Z function of a record label is find artist, make product, sell music. That kind of commoditizes art, which is kind of a sticky and icky thing to talk about in a way. But essentially, to a record label, your art is a commodity. Not a lot of labels are going to hold your hand and give you forehead kisses and be like, you are such a wonderful petite little snowflake and we're going to do everything you want because it's your art. If you're looking to work with a record label, you kind of need to understand and accept that at that point, your art is being commoditized. Record labels, while not all of them are for profit, they do require profit to function. I don't know very many record labels that are independently financed by wealthy backers who just are full of goodwill and really support, in my case, small metal bands. That's not really how it works. But jumping back, the main benefit of a record label to a small artist is physical releases. They have connections that you do not. You don't know the tape duplication factories. You don't know the vinyl pressing plants. You don't know the best place to get CDs made. You probably don't know the difference between CDs, CDRs, Digipack, Jewel Case, Eco Wallet, the different types of things, how to format your art to fit on the cover, or if you're doing like an insert for a vinyl. You don't know those things, probably. They do. They can help facilitate you getting from A to B and getting your stuff released. They'll walk you through the process a lot of the time. Some labels will even just do it for you. That is the best benefit, is they are the fast track to getting your stuff released. Now, everything that I just said is entirely possible without a label. You do not need a label to have tapes, CDs, vinyl. You can do all of those things independently. I know a bunch of bands who independently source their own product. It's not that hard to do. Some Googling goes a long way. The problem is that labels sometimes get special pricing depending on the label, the size, the quantity they're purchasing, the relationships that they have with that vendor. And a lot of times a label can fast track you through that process. It can be a little trickier if you're doing it independently. Tricky doesn't mean impossible. You can absolutely do it independently. and not even necessarily limited strictly to musical media, CDs, tapes, vinyl, whatever. Labels sometimes, at least those who dabble in merch, usually also have connections to screen printers, to people who do other digital products. And a lot of times they can help you out and they can connect you and facilitate the creation of booty shorts, sweatpants. You want to do a run of long sleeve t-shirts, they can usually help you make that happen. The label's probably going to take a cut. I don't know very many labels who just like connect people and then get out of the way. Normally there's a cut, or if they're the ones who are selling it for you, they're going to take a percentage out of that. So it's a little less, but you're paying for convenience. You're putting your trust in someone who's been through the process before. The second aspect that I think a lot of times gets overlooked by bands is the PR and marketing side. Clarification. I don't necessarily think that bands overlook this, but I think sometimes they undervalue it. Bands think that when they get signed to a label, the label's just going to take care of everything, and you're going to see exponential growth and it's boom, off to the races. And that's not how it works. If you are a band that has 57 followers on Instagram, unless you're brand new, you probably are not ready. There is so much more to being on a label or being ready for a label than having music. Is your music good? That's a tough question because quality is subjective, right? Is it good? Is it worth being released? And that's a heady philosophical question. Like, isn't all art worthy of being released? I don't think so, but I know people who do. And that, again, is going to depend on the label or whoever you're working with. I personally don't think that all music deserves to be released. I hear a lot of music in the work that I do with the label that I work with that is not good. And I don't think it deserves to be released. But that's not my call to make. But getting on a small to medium-sized indie label is going to get you exposure. That's one of the benefits, is the PR, marketing, network scalability. I don't like talking like that. It makes me feel like I read the Harvard Business Review or something, but it's true. Music is a business, at least as far as creating and selling and trying to make a living out of it. It is a business. And if you have a product that is, God, I hate that. If you have music that a label deems to be worth selling, i.e. they're going to sink a lot of money into tapes, CD, vinyl for you, because it does cost a lot of money. And if they have your music and they think that that's a worthwhile endeavor, then they're also generally going to put some PR and marketing into it, depending on the label. Some labels have dedicated PR people, and some labels just kind of do an email blast. They have a MailChimp list of 57 bloggers, reviewers, independent websites, and they'll blast it out to them and say, hey, I'm releasing new music. Here's what I'm releasing. And a lot of the times you can get picked up through one of those publications. Probably not all 57, maybe 4 or 5. That might be high. We'll say 4 or 5 to be generous. And they might want to do an interview. They might want a blurb for their website. They might give you a full-on premiere or release. It really kind of depends on the person who's reviewing the music. And then once that label has that music, they've done the PR, and it comes release time, you're going to get more eyes on you. Just by the nature of having a reputable source, most of the time, unless you're one of those idiots who's on like a ding-dong fascist label, and unfortunately those even usually have large networks, which is regrettable, that record label is going to have a fairly sizable, varies depending on genre, a fairly sizable audience. And so you are trusting them to market you to their audience. That's the second big benefit of a label. They know people you don't. They have a dedicated listener base. So when they see, hey, Jeff released a new butt rock album, their dedicated fan base is going to say, hey, we like the butt rock that this label usually puts out. I'm going to give this a listen. That doesn't guarantee sales. It doesn't guarantee that you're going to get new followers. You probably will get some. I think it's important to be pragmatic and realistic and have reasonable expectations. You're not going to blow up overnight, usually. Some people do. But also the flip side of this is that a lot of bands think that the label is just going to take care of those things. And that's wrong. This is why bands fail. The band has just as much of a responsibility to push their release as the label does. Maybe even more. I always try to outpush my label. It shows that you work hard, you take it serious, this is meaningful to you. And if a fan base for a label and a fan base for a band both see that you are really hustling and grinding for this release, that means something to people. That resonates, it clicks. They say, hey, these aren't bedroom hobbyists. There's nothing wrong with bedroom hobbyists. This means more to them. They're pushing hard, they take it seriously. Those things can have direct results on how well your music sells if that label wants to work with you again. And the other thing to keep in mind is that the labels all know each other. I operate in the realms of black metal and power trad metal. That's where my expertise lies. I know way more about the dungeon synth and various other synth sides of things than I wish that I did, but I know a lot about it. All of the labels know each other. They talk. If you act like a damn fool publicly, they know about it and they talk to each other and they give each other recommendations. And when one label doesn't like something or can't put it out, they might recommend you to another label and say, hey, label B, I don't have room for this. It's not a good fit for me. Maybe you should look at it. That's how a lot of bands get released, is recommendations from other labels. So you act like an idiot, they're going to find out, and you might just tank all your chances at getting a release. Something to think about. Back to the PR marketing side. Labels typically are much better connected than you are. Unless you are some sort of social media marketing PR whiz guru who doesn't need help, a label can be very beneficial in getting you out to publications, which can increase your visibility, which can increase your sales, which can increase your opportunities for basically everything. Now, if you are a band who, like I said, has 57 followers, you're fairly new, I would say you're not ready for a label. Unless your music is unbelievably good, you're probably not ready. You should take some time to play some shows, build a fan base, and kind of hustle your stuff independently. Garner some organic traction, a fan base, get a few thousand listens on some stuff. That will give you an indication of whether or not maybe what you're doing is up to snuff. Again, up to snuff is entirely subjective. What works for raw vampiric black metal does not work for power metal. So it just kind of depends. But if you are getting a lot of traction and you released a demo or a small EP on your Bandcamp digitally, and it's getting a lot of traction and people like it, then you might go to a label and say, hey, these are my numbers. This is why I think I'm a good fit. Your label is good for me because. I'm going to address how to pick a record label and how to submit to a record label in a different video. So I'm not going to get into that here. If you're getting some groove, you're getting some traction, it might be good for you. That also demonstrates to a potential label that you have the ability to network on your own, to push interactions and engagement, to connect with a listener base, and to get independent listens says, hey, people might buy something that I'm willing to put on tape or vinyl or CD. And that's all very important. The third benefit of a record label is networking at large. Kind of like how I talked about all the record labels know each other. They know so many other people. A lot of the time, the labels know bands or will have bands on their label across the country. I have several times when booking a tour, finding a show, needing artwork, needing to find a screen printer, gone to my label and said, hey, do you know anyone who can do this? And they have a list. They pull out the Rolodex. If you're too young to know what a Rolodex is, Google it. But, they'll whip out the contact list and say, oh yeah, I have these people who can help you. Let me reach out to them for you. Or sometimes they'll just give you the contact information and say, you can reach out to them, but name drop me. And all of that can be incredibly valuable. A record label gives you physical media, increases your audience, and is a valuable resource logistically if you're a band that's actively working, trying to tour, playing shows. All of these things cannot be understated. They are so important. And everything that I talked about is available to you independently. You can do all of the things that I just said by yourself. If you're a real hustler, if you're a person who's out there grinding for your band or your art or your bedroom dungeon food synth extravaganza double LP, whatever you're doing, you can do all of that stuff independently. I have friends who have toured with major bands in their genre with no record label, 250,000 streams, 1 million streams, who have just grinded. So you don't need a label. Not everybody does. If you want to be in complete creative control and not have to answer to anybody else and keep all of your money, independent might be the way to go for you. If you're someone who wants to pay for convenience, who thinks you fit in nicely with someone's kind of built-in fan base, if you want their expertise and help, a label is incredibly beneficial to you when you're ready for one. If you are an artist or a band who is really banking on getting on a label so that they can be your catapult to success, you are not ready for a label. As much as sometimes it might seem like a parasitic relationship, it is absolutely two ways. You get out of a label relationship what you put into it. But if you're not willing to talk about your release, push your release to your friends, email, blogs, playlists, whatever, independently, if you're not willing to push for your music, you're not ready to have someone else sink real world dollars into it. If you're on a label, if you run a label, if you've worked with a label, if you're thinking about applying for a label and you think I'm off base somewhere, I'd love for you to let me know. I'd love to hear about your experience with your label. If you're an independent musician, what you think you got out of a label relationship, or if you're one of the few who succeeded without needing a label, I'd love to hear about that too. Hit that subscribe button and let's chat.